Hello, I'm Wayne Shattuck, and I'm retired now after 43 years of being a television meteorologist, weather person. And I feel very fortunate for a couple of reasons. One, I've been very fortunate to work a number of spots around the country, including Oklahoma City. And also, I'm very fortunate because I was able to achieve a certain amount of success and not being a degreed meteorologist. I've taken meteorology in college. I've peppered every weather service office that I worked in that market, peppered them with questions. And I was very fortunate the first time I came into Oklahoma City meeting Ross Dixon, who had a private forecasting company by the name of WeatherScan. And he kind of took me under his wing, and I learned a lot from Ross. So I do feel very, very fortunate for what I've been able to do. But when I was young, I had no idea this is the path I was going to lead. I grew up in northwest Iowa in a small town named Smithland, 350 people. And as a matter of fact, I was supposed to take over my father's job. He was a livestock and grain trucker in our little valley, and I was being groomed to take over his job. But as I was getting older, and he could see this too, the farmers were getting their own equipment, their own small trucks, and his job was kind of dying, and so he was trying to figure out what I could do. And he would see these uniformed drivers. He knew I could drive. And he saw these new uniformed drivers that wore a tie and a jacket, and they had company benefits. He decided that's what I was going to do. I was going to become a Greyhound bus driver. And this was in the summer between my junior and senior year of high school, and so he was the guy I always looked to for advice. So that's what I was going to do. And it got through that fall, and around Christmas time in my senior year, I went to Dad and I said, "Pop, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I don't think I want to be a Greyhound bus driver." So he said, "That's fine." He said, "You'll figure it out." Fortunately, they pointed me towards school. It wasn't a big university or anything. It was a junior college out in North Platte, Nebraska. And I went out there in the fall of 1966. And that first year, I was always having to work while I was going to school. And I got to know, I was working in the shopping strip, and I got to know a young man who worked next door in a men's clothing store. On the weekends, he did radio. I went up to meet him at the end of his shift, go out to have a beer afterwards, but I was mesmerized when I was watching him, and he could see that, and he, after a while, he said, "Why don't you apply for a job?" And I did, and at the beginning of my second year of college there, they asked me to go to work, and in that first year of college, I think I changed my major 3 times. Again, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but boy, I tell you, I got behind that microphone, and that really, really got me. I was kind of an introvert, and the great thing about radio was you were in a room by yourself. All there was the microphone, and you could kind of open up. And I loved that, and I thought this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. So I did that my sophomore year at that junior college. Then the third year I went back to Sioux City, went to a school called Briar Cliff, and worked in radio almost full time there. And I was always, and at times it's kind of unfortunate, I was always chasing more money. And I got a call at the end of my junior year. I got a call from that original radio station, asked me to come back and work full time for them. So I went there, and then I found out the radio station and the one TV station in town, they were co-owned. And I found out later they were kind of, the general manager of both places were kind of in cahoots, because I was there at the radio station for about 30 days, and the general manager from the TV station came and asked me if I would do the weather for them, and the late night weather, the 10 o'clock, and the audio books for the next day. TV markets are rated by size, and there's something like 250 markets in the country. I don't know if North Platte is the smallest, but it's either the smallest or next to smallest market in the country. And the general manager at the TV station was out doing all his managerial duties all day, then acting as an active salesman on the street and then doing the weather at night, and he was killing himself. And he asked me if I'd do the 10 o'clock weather and the auto books. And I told him, I don't know anything about weather. And he said, come here, I'll show you. In North Platte, in 1969, you could do that. You certainly couldn't do it today, but that turned out to be even a bigger draw, a bigger kick than radio. It was, TV camera was just another microphone, and you had 2 or 3 guys in the studio. So you were very comfortable, or at least I was very comfortable environment. So I did that for about 10 months, a radio job that paid more than both my jobs in North Platte. Opened up in Lincoln, Nebraska. I went there for a couple of years, and then prior to that I had applied at all the TV stations in Sioux City, Iowa, and also in Omaha. Never got a call back from them until a year later. Got a call back from the CBS station in Sioux City, Iowa, and they wanted me, and I went up there. Again, still very green, no real education behind me. But I went up there. I started driving to the National Weather Service office frequently and asking those folks as many questions as I could. And it was interesting, that station, it was CBS affiliate, but it was UHF in Sioux City, which is a very hilly town. This is way before cable. We had pockets in that town that couldn't get us because UHF signal does not bend over hills the way VHF does. But that was very interesting. I was very happy there. After a year there doing the weather, in fact, we had very small staff, and we worked a 6-day week. I worked Monday through Friday, had Saturday off, and on Sundays I did the weather and the sports. Then on that was a Sunday, I did the weather and the sports. On Saturday, the sports guy did his sports and the weather. So we kind of all got together to kind of do the jobs and get it done on a small staff and a small budget. But about a year and a half after I was there, I was also asked to do the noon show, which was a little bit of news and kind of an interview show every day. And that was a lot of fun. I had a co-host with that, and we had a great time doing that. And then what got me to leave Sioux City was, after 4 years, they decided the ratings on that noon show was not where they wanted them to be, and they decided to replace the noon show with Little Rascal episodes. Well, that was, and wanted me to host it, which that kind of bothered me a little bit, but the kicker was they wanted me to host it in period dress, like the Little Rascals. And boy, I knew I didn't want to stay there after that. And this is 75, and I didn't know any agents. I didn't know where to look. And I saw in Broadcasting Magazine this ad for a gal named Shirley Barish. She wasn't so much an agent back then. She was, I think, called a tape broker. And people would send her sports, weather, news people would send her tapes. And then when a news director would want somebody, she would send them a package of tapes, and if he picked one and hired somebody from her batch of tapes, she would get, I think, 10% of their first year's salary. Nothing came from the talent. So I sent in tapes, and I get a call from the news director at the NBC station in Miami. And he wants to hire me over the phone. And I'm saying, gosh, that's a compliment, but I can't go down there without looking at the station, and he just doesn't want to hire me. He doesn't want to spend the money to get me down there, but he does. I go down there and I look around the place, the station, and so much bigger than what I'd ever seen before. And he's driving me back to the airport, and they had offered me to be the main guy on the NBC station to begin in January of '76. They offered me $18,000. And I said, I'm thinking, he asked me if I would accept the job, and I think I've got a counter. I can't just take what he offers. And I said, well, Mr. Gene Struhl, I guess was his name. And I said, Mr. Struhl, I can't come down for 18. Might be able to come down for 18.5. Thankfully, he didn't laugh at me, but he looked pretty stern. He said, well, I don't know that I can do that. And he put me on the plane without any kind of deal. That was on a Sunday. I'll go back to work Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And finally, Thursday, I get a call. He said, okay, I'll give you a U-Haul truck, and I'll give you $18.5 to come down. So I go down there. Again, it was quite an experience. I'd never been east of the Mississippi before, and never worked in unions. I remember, gosh, I went up to engineering to look at a tape that had come down from the network to a weather tape, some disaster somewhere else in the country. And the engineer was showing me the tape, and it's playing, and he has to go down the row of machines to start or stop a commercial tape. And I'm reaching up, the tape of the weather event had finished, and just to help out, I was going to shut it off. I'm reaching up I get a couple of inches away from touching the stop button, and he screams out, "Don't touch that!" And he said, "That's union work." And I'm a kid. I didn't know. So that was my introduction to unions. So we worked there about almost 3 years, I guess. And we wanted to buy our first house. But at that salary, it was coming up a little bit, but not much. We really couldn't afford a house. So I'm looking in broadcasting again, and there's a blind box ad, and it turned out to be Oklahoma City. I came up and interviewed at KOCO, got the job, and it was for a $5,000 increase, which felt like $10,000 because the cost of living was so much lower here in Oklahoma City than it was down in Miami. So that was my introduction to Oklahoma City, and I think at the time Fred Norman was doing the weather 6 and 10, and this news director Foster Morgan put me on instead of Fred. To Fred's credit, he was always kind to me. He still was working at the station, but not on those late evening shows. And I worked, I think I started the same week as Jane Giroux, and Jack Ogle was working at the station at that time. He was a character. I really enjoyed him. I met so many people here. Chris Lee, one of our photogs who became later a chief photographer at KOCO. Just great people, all of them. But after a year, we were bought by Gannett, and Gannett really finally started putting personnel and money into the station. They brought in a news director named Tom Kirby, who was a heck of a people person as news director, and he really got us going and charging. And he realized the attractiveness of Fred and brought back Fred. I think he moved me to noon and 5, or noon and 6, and Fred did 5 or 6 and 10 o'clock, and that lasted for a year and a half or so until they put me back on the main shows. But had a great time, and it was a real learning experience for me, and a great thing to see. I'm still pretty young, and I mean, Kirby had a way of getting everybody really charged up, and he could get all that extra effort out of you. And it's the only place I ever worked where something would come across the scanner, and I would see photographers fighting each other to get to the door first to be able to go out and get that story. But that's when we became 5 Alive, and I think we really started to make a name for ourselves, became a player in the market. That was 78, 79, and then 80. In fact, 78 and 79, I came to the station that was at 63rd and Portland, a building that was never designed to be a TV station. The ceilings were low, and the studio was with big old can lights. It got hot. People would sweat. I felt sad for the anchors because they had to be on for the entire half hour or news block, and it really got hot for them. But it was a good experience being there with the whole team. Was Ross, was Fred Norman, Merrill Teller, who went on to Wichita and made a great career up there, and then myself. So I really did enjoy that. But sometime in 80, maybe June, we moved out to our brand new building out on Britain, and what a fantastic operation that was. I went from, funny thing, on Portland, that was the first place I had my own radar in the station. But it was a limited radar. It was an old AVQ-10 military radar, a World War II radar, that had been colorized. And it painted a very good picture in close. it had a range, an effective range of about 50 miles. So if the storm was close, we painted a pretty good picture, but anything beyond that, it was pretty hard to see. So when we went to the new building, we got an Enterprise radar and all the equipment. And it was very, very nice. But unfortunately, on my part, I was always chasing that brass ring, and I got a call out of the blue from a station in the CBS station in Dallas, and they asked me to come down there. I later found out, and never was able to confirm this, but I later found out that rumor was told to me that somebody from one of the other stations had contacted them or contacted an agency that said, you know, does anybody want this guy to get me out of the market? So anyway, I go down there and I work 4 years. We had a great general manager there who assembled a good team and got us to #1 within a year and a half. We knocked off WFAA, which they had been #1 since the mid-70s. The only negative thing about it, he spent quite a bit of money to get us to #1. Of course, advertising rates are higher when you're #1. But he was always catching hell from the guy upstairs. The guy upstairs, this was Times Mirror, and the guy upstairs had been the previous general manager at that station, and he'd never taken it any higher than a mediocre #2. Well, he gets kicked upstairs to be the head of all the broadcast group, and this young guy comes in and he gets us to #1, and I think there was some animosity or jealousy between those two, and finally, after about 3 years, 3.5 years, our GM said, I don't need this. He went off, bought an independent station in Dallas, and that guy came back down and said, I'm going to run this place and make it more profitable than that SOB ever did. So first thing he did, he started getting rid of the talent. We had a great sports guy named Dale Hansen who got canned, and fortunately for WFAA, they realized his value. They picked him up, and heck, he's still #1 guy in the Dallas market today. Next guy was a tremendous anchor named Chip Moody, and he was extremely popular. They didn't try to redo him. He went down to Houston for a number of years before coming back to Dallas for WFAA. Well, I was #3, and they didn't actually fire me per se, but my contract went to the end of the year, and towards the end of the summer, all of a sudden I was put on weekends, which gave me a pretty good idea. My future was not bright at that station. So I'm looking around, and out of the blue, I get a call from Channel 5 again. It's Al Parsons, the GM there, and he asked me if I would consider coming back, and we talked and talked and talked, and finally I came back. And I do really want to mention that I think thought a lot of Al Parsons. He was a very good guy and treated me very fairly. But came back and I worked again, the second tour of duty, from the end of '84 to January 1 of 1990. And we had a great time. We were doing backyard weather then, the early evening weathercast, weather permitting. We're always done out at a remote site. I think we even had people write in letters why we should do the weather in their backyard. We went to different places. I remember at Frontier City, we did a live weather shot where I'm up on this giant slide and I come down and finish that slide screaming all the way, and then try to calmly do the weather. But we did a lot of fun things, and it was a very great time, and I felt very comfortable there. But I was still always chasing that brass ring, and towards the end of '89, I get a call from my former news director down in Dallas. He's now out in LA. Disney had bought an independent station out there, and they were trying to decide what they were going to do. And they ended up deciding they were going to try to make it like a mini or a local CNN, not 24 hours a day, but they were going to do extended news, and the callers were KCAL. And anyway, through the help of my news director, I got hired to be their main guy out there. Went out there. But at that time, my wife and I were both 41, and we get out there, and it didn't take us long to decide that LA was not where we wanted sink roots and be. It's just too many people, too tight. I never spent so much time waiting in lines at grocery stores, you know, every kind of store. You couldn't walk up to a movie like we all just normally do. You had to go there earlier in the day and get tickets and then come back later. It was just too crowded, and looking around, can't find a place. And so I went to, in the fall of '91, I went to WKY. I keep calling it WKY, it's KFOR, and met a lot of great folks, including Linda Cavanaugh and Bob Barry Sr. and Jr. and Brad Edwards, just a ton of good folks. Dan Threlkeld was in the weather team, also Mr. Lazalier from now in Tulsa, he was on the team. But just a bunch of great folks. Jim Williams, unfortunately, I had a great relationship with Jim when I worked at Channel 5 years previous. He was already gone from Channel 4 when I got there. But I'll tell you one story about Jim Williams. You know, people are competitive from other stations, but I never wanted to be. I wanted to be if someone wanted to be friendly with me, I certainly wanted to be friendly with him. And I always felt it was that way with Jim. Every time I saw him out in public, he was a very courteous gentleman and just a nice guy. I even remember one time when I was at 5, he called me up, "Wayne, have you got any teletype paper? I've run out, you know." And I said, "Yeah, come on over and get it. I've got an extra box." And so he'd come over and we did things like that for each other. It wasn't that competitive. We let the management worry about that. But he was a great guy. And I had the same situation with our in-house folks. I was thinking about some funny things back at 5 in earlier years. One time, of course, there were a bunch of characters there. Bill Howard, what a sweetheart of a guy. I would just look at Bill and start laughing, and he would raise an eyebrow or drop his pipe out of his mouth or something. He could make me break up on camera easier than anybody I knew. And I think Fred Norman watched that, and he started to mimic Bill a lot in those days. But I remember one time I was out doing a live shot at Lake Hefner. This was before it had been remodeled out around Lake Hefner, and I was at the edge of the lake. I was doing this live shot. I'm here, the camera's here, and the lake's behind me. Well, I go to do the weather, and I've got to the 7-day, or maybe it was just a 5-day then, and it's up on a monitor, and I've got to read it. So they put that full on the screen. I walk around the camera up to the back of the truck to read the 7-day or the 5-day, and then as it's coming to an end, I know they're going to finish with a shot on me. I'm walking back, talking and walking backwards. I get back, and there was a ledge about this high that dropped down to the water's edge. There was still a bit of sand there, but I stepped right over that ledge, and my butt was up in the air, and my hands and legs were up in the air, and they catch me. They come back to a shot on me as I'm going down on my back. And it was soft sand. It didn't hurt or anything, but that was a funny moment on air. I got caught quite well on that. But back to my time at Channel 4, I was really hoping that was going to be the last move. I guess I was about 43 at that time, and had a lot of great friends in the business, out of the business, here in Oklahoma City, and when I was younger, it was fun to move. I was getting to the point where it wasn't as much fun to move anymore, and we really wanted to be home. Everything seemed to be going great, and the only problem was the news director, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name, but he was a sharp guy, I thought, hired me, and we had, at some stations there are managers that are a little crazier than others, and I thought this manager was a little bit crazy, but our news director got in a disagreement with the general manager, and he left. So we were a few months without a news director, and finally we hired this news director out of Miami, and he was a hard-charging guy. He was going to make this station, boy, we were going to be #1 by far, and he was going to have the camera moving around fast and tighten up those interviews, and everything's fine. I didn't think anything was wrong with the weather department, but after he'd been there about a month, he comes to me and he said, Wayne, he says, you're not making the weather exciting enough. And I said, excuse me? And he said, you got to put more excitement in the weather. And I said, well, sir, I said, this is Oklahoma. I said, we've got a pretty savvy audience. I said, they know severe weather. I said, if it's bad, I'm going to tell them it's bad, but I'm not going to hype or overblow a storm. He said, okay. So didn't hear anything from him for another couple of months, and all of a sudden I was put on the desk, and he brought in somebody who he thought was a little bit more exciting. So my only saving grace was that I had one of my good friends here in Oklahoma City, attorney. When we had made the deal, he kind of acted as my agent, and he got me a no-cut contract. And that's a thing of the past. I don't know anybody that's got a no-cut contract anymore. Well, I was put on the desk during the day and then had to do the Saturday and Sunday morning weather. And I think they were kind of wanting me to go on down the road, but I was looking around trying to find something at a decent place, and it took me almost 4 years to find it, but I finally found Tampa. I had a lot of fun and had a lot of great opportunities. Met a lot of neat people. I know down in Dallas, we were a CBS affiliate, and that's when the program, the television show Dallas was on, and every once in a while they would send in one of the cast members, Patrick Duffy or Linda Gray, to be on our newscast, our early evening newscast, and that was kind of fun, meeting those folks. And I guess the biggest thing that happened was that in that second tour of duty at KOCO, I get a call one day, and the caller, it's a lady. She says she's a producer at Good Morning America, and would I consider coming up and filling in for Spencer Christian? Well, I can't remember exactly what I said to her, but I thought it was some of my buddies pulling a scam on me. So I said something dumb, and I'm sure, and hung up the phone. Thank God she called back. And she says, this is real, and convinced me, and I went to Al Parsons, or I guess it was Tom Kirby by then, he was the general manager, and he said yes, and so I went up to fill in for Spencer Christian Christmas week of '87. I got up there the day, I guess it was the day before Christmas, or I walked into the station the day before Christmas. They wanted me to follow Spencer on Christmas Eve day because his vacation started the next day, and they wanted me to see his routine. So I followed him around like a shadow on that day. Spencer, by the way, is just a tremendous guy. He was very friendly and just one of the nicest guys I've met. I worked at an ABC station later in Tampa, and he came down and did some things for us there, and just, again, a very great guy. So I think a lot of him. But his shift, he first did a hour show before Good Morning America called. At that time it was called World News This Morning. And it was 4 15-minute segments that the local stations could take as much or as little of that as they wanted. So I did, or he did that, did weather, one hit with weather in each 15-minute segment for that, and then he went downstairs and did the Good Morning America spots with Joan London was the female anchor at that time, and Charlie Gibson had just started about 6 months before. So I followed him around. Everything seems fine, and they told me that they would pick me up from the hotel at about 4:45 the next morning, or 4:50, and so I get picked up. I get into the building. Now, at Good Morning America at that time, they employed a meteorologist who would come in at about midnight, and he'd put 90% of the show together in the overnight period, make up the maps, take them up to the art department, and then brief Spencer at a little before 5, and Jerry, the meteorologist, is not there. And I think he's probably already taken the maps upstairs or doing something, and it gets to be about 5 minutes after 5, and I think the director called and said, "Is Jerry there?" And I said, "No." And she said, "I'll call you right back." And so 5 minutes later, she calls back, and it appears that Jerry, who lived out on Long Island, had gone to a Christmas party the night before, partied too much, and had overslept. And this Christmas morning, it's snowing to beat the band. It's crazy. So she said, "Do you think you could put things together?" I said, "No, I've been doing this a while. I know how to do this." They had a map machine there, thankfully. They had a die-fax machine. I ripped off some maps, drew up the maps, and I needed temperatures though. So the computer was there. I turned on the computer, came up, it says password. Like, what am I going to do for a password? So I'm thinking, what can I do to get temperatures? I'm thinking, do I call back to Butch and Ben at KOCO, or do I call one of the guys I know at the National Weather Service here in town, or just what the heck can I do? And finally, I think I grab a page and I send him out on the street, pick up New York Times. We open up the Times and I copy down the forecast highs for a map from the Times. And then I had this page take up those maps up to our department, and that got me started that first hour and into the first segment on Good Morning America before Party Boy came in and started bringing things up to speed. In a way that was good, I think, because it kept me from being nervous, and I didn't have any problem. And when I got to that first shot on Good Morning America, you know, those shots are pretty tiny. At the local stations, we have anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 minutes to do the weather. Well, one of their longest shots was a minute 10 or minute 15, and you have to do a lot of physical. Back then, you had to do a lot of physical moves. I don't know what it is now, but anyway, I had to start at one spot, then you walk into chroma key with the maps, and then you throw it to a 15-second break for the local station, and then you come back at another spot. So I make the moves, do the forecast, come back to my spot. The camera comes out on me after going to the local station, and again, Charlie Gibson had just started 6 months before. So I ended, my end tag was supposed to be, "That's the weather to now." Now back to Joan and Charlie. And I said, "That's the weather to now." Now back to Joan, and I was drawing a blank on Charlie. And I don't think it was more than a second and a half or 2 seconds or something, but just as I think of Charlie and I start saying, I hear in my ear, Charlie say, "That's Charlie, Wayne." And I said, that's right. And so I'm thinking, you know, that's the end of my career at Good Morning America. Did the rest of the week, everything was fine, but I didn't think they were going to ask me back. But they asked me back for another weekend to fill in that summer of '88, and then again the fall or Christmas week of '88, '89 again. So I was able to go up there for a total of 3 weeks and fill in, and that has to be a highlight. Didn't want to leave Oklahoma City. Both my wife and I wanted to spend many more years here, but went to Tampa, and that was the last stop. Ended up working there 20 years and finished June 1st of 2015. But we've got so many great memories of here. All the people at Channel 4 and at Channel 5. I guess I spent the majority of my time there. Again, Bill Howard, Mike Waters, Pat Finney. He had such a dry sense of humor. He could make you laugh, and he'd never crack a smile, but he was a real character. And Ida B, gosh, what a great lady she was. She was a fantastic lady, a real spark plug, and I would have liked to know Ida B in her younger years. I've seen pictures of her when she was doing her entertainment interviews, and just a tremendous lady. I feel fortunate to be able to have known her as long as I have, but just some great folks. It almost did feel like a family at Channel 5. Of course, we were all a lot younger then, but we just really worked together, and and had a great time. And you know, if what you were doing took 2 hours more than your regular shift, you did it and you didn't complain, and everybody packed on. Another thing, you know, with Channel 5, prior to Gannett getting us, we didn't have a helicopter like the other stations, and with the help of Gannett, we were able to get our own helicopter. That was part of the time when we became 5 Alive, and gosh, it was great. We had a helicopter pilot, Hank Orr, tremendous guy. I love that guy. And you know, we did things. We used that helicopter like a taxi, and no other market I've ever worked in did they use it as much as a utility as we did. And I've told other folks at other stations, and they seem to be amazed. But we used it every day to transport anchors and crew down to the state fair, to do most of our early evening shows right at the state fair. We would do weather specials out in western Oklahoma at a small town in a gymnasium. I would do the 6 o'clock weather, jump in the helicopter with Hank Orr and a couple of other folks from the station. We'd go out, land in the schoolyard. Of course, all the people were around watching, and then we'd go into the gymnasium and everybody filed in, and we'd do a 45-minute to an hour weather show, and then we'd hop back in the helicopter, come back in, and I'd be back in time to do the 10 o'clock. And nowhere else in the country that I've worked that helicopters are used to that degree. It was a great time, and I've got so many great memories of those folks.